Already people are there.
Let's start. Good morning, everyone. I am Natasha Angural. I am IITD BTech batch of 2015. I'm currently working as a manager in Quantitative Services Bank of America, and I'm also EC member at IITDAA Alumni Association and the convener of subcommittees to virtual meetings and private networks. In today's session on how to shoot like a pro with Jen Sharma, we will learn how to make still moments more colorful and more precious. We are going to cover topics such as, basics of mobile photography, how to shift camera from auto to manual settings, and the basic terminologies that is being used in photography, such as aperture, depth of field, etc. How to, cover wildlife photographs and lots more of it. So starting with the show, I would like to welcome IITD Alumni Association President, Mr. Ravinder Kumar, to please give the welcome address.
Yeah, thank you very much, Natasha, giving me an opportunity to welcome on behalf of IIT Delhi Alumni Association. This is the event on the photography, and the revolution of the mobile phone has brought photography to each of us. Now, we have moved from professional level to amateur level, and so this is a very relevant topic, and I think subject which you people have conceived, and I'm very happy that it is coming well. The good response has come. So on behalf of IIT Delhi Administration, I welcome all the participants, attendees, and the experts. Special thanks to Mr. Jen Sharma, who's award-winning wildlife photographer, and Natasha from as AC member, and then Praveen Kumar and Walmag, Mr. Ajit Kumar. They all have come together, and from the office bearer side, the Josna and Gitanjali, they are also on my team. They are taking a lot of efforts, and so with that, I just give back to the Natasha, and I hope that this is the theme which they have written, like a learn, play, and win. With this motto, this I wish great success to the upcoming event also, the photography week, and today is the first day. So I welcome again all the participants. Thank you very much taking your time and making and attending this webinar. And over to Natasha. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. President. So now I would like to welcome Jen Sharma. So Jant was formerly an IIT employee and IIM Bangalore pass out. He quitted his job to pursue his passion in wildlife photography. So Jant believes that there is no meaning to taking pictures of beautiful animals and birds if these pictures can't be used to protect or save them. Jant has won various awards as a wildlife photographer, as is mostly known for his renowned photograph tour company, Toehold. I welcome you, Jant.
Thank you very much. My video is not getting enabled, so I think you have to enable my camera.
Just give me 1 second. Jant, I think it's... I'm not sure why your video is enabled, because it's enabled from this end.
Okay, let me fix that. Well, so it says the video is disabled for me. I don't know. Okay, now it's getting, yeah, now I am the co-host.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you may continue. Over to
all
you.
Right. All right. So I think I have just about an hour and less than that. So I'll just share my screen so that people can see what I'm showing, not just my face. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, all of you, for joining this session. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will take a few minutes to introduce myself. Thank you for that brief introduction. The goal of today's session, which I want to conduct, is basically show the perspective of a professional photographer. Even though I am a wildlife photographer, I think most of what I'll be talking about is photography generally, It's just that you adapt photography to different genres of photography. Like somebody could be a journalism photographer, somebody could be a landscape photographer, somebody wants to be a, let's say, a food photographer, architecture, landscape, and so many different forms of photography. So the topic is how to shoot like a pro and, use any kind of a camera that we have effectively. So allow me to quickly tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in a family where photography is business. This is me when I was 4 years old. So I started taking pictures even as a child without knowing how to read and write. Because my father is a photographer. He ran a photography school in Mysore. He was an archaeology department photographer in the University of Mysore. And my initial years were spent, being in the middle of artists and photographers and stuff like that, which is why there's a huge influence in my life about creativity and stuff like that. So today I run a company called Toehold. We are India's oldest and probably the most biggest photography tour business that exists, which means we take people to a lot of different parts of the world. We teach people photography, we enable them with camera gear on hire, and then we take them out on tours and travel expeditions as well. So teaching photography is one of my most exciting, things that I do at work. I do this on most weekends. I do this on most, trips that we undertake. And I love to teach photography, and I can understand people like you who are from IIT and alumni and stuff like that, who are highly intellectuals. You would be able to produce amazing results if you really understood some basics of photography. So the idea here is, in the limited amount of time we have, we cannot really learn photography in depth. I think we should call this learning about photography, to be more precise. So I've been a speaker. I've been on many platforms talking about my passion for wildlife and photography. One of the most important things that I keep telling is photography is not my passion. Photography is my tool to express my passion, which is the most important thing that I want everybody who learns photography to know, because it's like a tool. You are using this tool to express a passion. That itself is not, probably not enough to just call that itself a passion, because if you're passionate about the camera, then it's just the gadgetry things. Imagine if you are passionate about some subject and you use the camera to express yourself. That's when you can go farther and reach newer heights. Just to show you my workstations in the world, from the Arctic to Antarctica, from the Far East of Russia to the Wild West, Central America to a lot of Africa, Europe, and also the Arctic, where we've done a lot of expeditions for polar bears, and Antarctica for penguins. This is some of the areas that I work with. So I come with a lot of knowledge of the general wildlife of this world, and I'm passionate about a few areas which will definitely be discussed over the next few minutes. So I think we have a Q&A tab there in Zoom. If you guys want to ask me questions, I'll probably have some part of the session dedicated to answering questions. You can go ahead and ask your questions in the Q&A tab. You can also feel free to type your stuff in the chat. I'll see if I can answer that as well. So I don't know individually who all are here, what's your experience, what's your background and stuff like that. I'll tell you what I do with respect to my photography. I travel the world. I go to places where there are exotic wildlife, and I photograph them, and I publish stories, information, and write about it. I educate the world about the beautiful world that we live in. I used to be working with multinational companies like Accenture, America Online, and stuff like that when I was in my mid-20s. I quit my job because I wanted to do photography full time. And I come to the table with an experience of a little bit of entrepreneurship background, where I have learned a lot. I've learned a lot of things that I shouldn't be doing. And I've learned a lot of things related to the world of photography and natural history and wildlife. So while I keep a tab on the question and answers, I would be happy to separate the question and answer session later on so that I don't miss my flow. Yes, Somesh. These are monitor lizards. There are two monitor lizards which are fighting. It looks like they're actually hugging each other and saying long time no see, but the truth is they're actually two fierce, in battle. They both are fighting. I don't know why they were fighting, maybe for territory or maybe for mating rights or God knows what, but the point is they were in a rigorous battle. So as a photographer, what's important to know is your focus should be the subject. It's not about the gadgets, because gadgets should become second nature. It is like, you don't start thinking about your equipment when you're starting to produce good imagery. It should become second nature. The camera should become a part of your body. Just like how you use your fingers, your tongue, your speech, your mind, your thoughts, the camera should become one of your extensions of the body. That's when you'll not be conscious of it. Like I'm talking right now, I'm not thinking and talking. Whatever is in my heart gets translated to my mind and it's coming out as speech. The camera should exactly become like that. Easier said than done, but if you train yourself, it's very easy to become that. So this is my first photograph that I got published in the year 2006-7, when I was just moving out of my IT job. This was on the cover of a beautiful magazine called Sanctuary Asia magazine. So just to tell you my history of moving from IT to photography, I was not a fed up IT employee. In fact, I love doing IT work. Even now, if I alt tab Zoom, I have Dreamweaver open, I'm coding something. So I was passionate about wildlife, even though I was passionate about what I used to do as a user experience designer in an IT firm as well. So the thing is, because I couldn't manage both 5-6 days a week, I had to choose between the two, and I took a bold step or an audacious step, or let's say stupid step back then, according to many. Fortunately, it seems to be working. I still have a long way to go. I'm still not what people can call success. I'm still trying to be successful. So this is my first photograph, which got published on the cover of Sanctuary Asia magazine. Now, on the same year, I produced this photograph, which is a huge elephant. It's a female, it's a matriarch of that herd. She's actually charging my boat. She's attacking my boat. We can call that a mock charge because there's nothing I had done to her. She just saw me, she was already upset, and she's charging the boat. These are initial images. The reason why I want to show you this is this particular image was photographed with an equipment which hardly costs even lesser than today's smartphones. It was an 8,000 rupees lens that I used. My first award, Sanctuary Asia Wildlife Photographer of the Year, there was this contest which happened and I won a prize in that contest. And this was a very humble equipment that I had in my early days. Now, talking about today's photography, right? Before we go ahead and talk about the science, art, and everything else, I want to separate photography into two aspects. One is photography can be done to document what you're seeing. Now, that is what we call documentary photography, which means, let's say you work for a news agency and you go to the narcotics bureau today, where there's a lot of action happening, and you stand outside. There's an actor who comes, you take a picture, they've been interviewed, they've gone out, there's a story, you're taking a picture there, and you're publishing that in the newspaper or the TV channel or wherever. Now, the perspective of how people look at this photograph is different from what you're looking at on your screen right now. So the other kind of photography, which is not documentary, is called creative photography. So when you take a photograph to produce a piece of art, then we call that a creative photo. If you produce a photograph to show as a piece of record or a document, then we call that a record shot or a documentary photograph. A lot of people think reproducing a scene through a camera as a photograph is photography. It surely is, but it need not be just that. What I mean is, when you take a camera and you input a scene into the camera, you press a button, you get an output. Now, if your photograph is very similar to that of a photocopy machine that was there outside your college when you went and got your textbooks photocopied, now our camera need not be such a boring reproduction machine. What I mean to say is, it need not see nature, press a button, it produces an output which exactly looks like that in the output. The photographs need not be that boring at all. So you can actually input a scene, make some stuff in the camera, and produce an output that is not even the way nature looks like to your naked eye. So just to clear the confusion, documentary photography, where the purpose is to produce a photograph of what you see. So let's call this what you see is what you get kind of a photograph. And the second part, creative photography, where you create stuff on the camera. You just don't merely copy what is there in nature. You take a picture by making changes to your mechanics, the science, the gadgets. You produce a photograph which looks different from how it is in real life. I hope that is clear. If you have any questions on this topic, please feel free to ask. So the thing is, depending on what kind of photographer you want to be, your journey is entirely different, right? So anybody wants to ask questions, please use the Q&A tab. If you raise hands, I won't be able to notice too many things. I'm already noticing the QA tab, the chat, and concentrating on what I want to say. So please go ahead and leave your questions in Q&A. I'll find my time to go ahead and answer that, and we'll come to that. All right, great. So the moment you decide what kind of a photographer you want to become, then your journey is entirely different. Now, people speak about mobile phone photographs. Every now and then somebody or the other asks me saying, mobile phones are becoming so excellent and good. Sorry. Okay, I think somebody's just unmuted their mic. All right, so I was saying, mobile phones are becoming such excellent cameras themselves, right? Today, I use, somebody was asking me on my Instagram, which is your most frequently used camera? And I was telling them it's my phone, it's my smartphone. So mobile phones are really the most easiest cameras that we can carry around. Having said that, people ask, do you think there is scope for a photographer in today's era? Do you think DSLRs or mirrorless cameras are really the way to go? Do you really think we should use them? Can we not get everything from a mobile camera itself because they're already so good? They have 100 megapixel, 50 megapixel, 60 megapixel and stuff like that. Well, if you're curious to know the answer is yes and no. A lot of photographs which can be shot in DSLRs today, or let's say mirrorless cameras today, can be photographed by mobile phones. In fact, I use my phone a lot. Having said that, there is a big limitation to what a mobile device can do because it doesn't have a super telephoto lens. It cannot capture subjects in distance. It's not really very good in low light. Still, I think there's a long way to go for mobile devices to be able to compete with professional cameras. Even today, professionals really cannot do great work in mobile devices. Having said that, a lot of us can produce excellent images using our mobile devices. So a lot of what I talk today is not about DSLRs or about mobile phones. It's about the world of photography. To be honest, 25 years ago, people used to use a film camera. They had to put a film roll, they have to wind it, they have to click a photo, wind it, click a photo, wind it, click a photo. But today we have cameras which are like, we click 12 frames in a second, 10 frames in a second, and we immediately see the results. Technology is evolving. I don't have to tell IIT guys about that. Technology is evolving by the minute. As we speak, there's a new technology that's being worked on. What has never changed in the last, God knows, 150 years of everybody doing photography and 20 years since people are doing digital photography is the artistry, the creativity, the thought process, the compositional abilities, the storytelling abilities. That has not changed in a long time, and I don't think it will go also. What can change is the megapixels of a camera, mirrorless comes, DSLR goes, film camera goes, digital camera comes, something else goes. But the foundation of why we do photography is to express creatively has not got any different from how it used to be 50 years ago, 25 years ago. So that is something which is important to note. So whatever I speak of today in the next few minutes, I think I have 40 more minutes. I'll try my best to keep them intact. So I just wanted to show you some of the areas I've worked, what kind of imageries I produce. Like, for example, these are 2 tigers in the Madhya Pradesh National Park of Bandhavgarh, one of my favorite national parks for tiger photography. It's a winter morning, quite foggy. There's a male which is, I think this is a mating ritual. Just after the mating, they fight like this for about 2 seconds. And then the female turns aside and sleeps. The male goes away and sleeps. This is just after the mating of 2 tigers. So see, this is a photograph which is an exemplary example of why creativity is important in photography. This is not a document of this tiger's photo. In other words, if this tiger was applying for a visa or passport, it wouldn't be able to use this photograph for it, because there's a lot of light play in this. There's a lot of shadows and light, and there's creativity involved in making this a black picture with only the tiger getting light on it. We call this spotlight photography. This is not done by manipulating an image using Photoshop. This has been shot like this on the field. So a lot of you who are different genres of photographers, somebody wants to be fashion photographer, Abhishek is saying somebody wants to be different kind of photographer. Since I'm a wildlife photographer, please bear with examples I show of only wildlife. But what you need to understand is the logic, the theory, the aspect of photography. I am putting a tiger here and exposing it like this. You can put your supermodel here and expose the same concept. So the point here is the camera is the same. If you buy a Sony, Nikon, Canon, DSLR, they don't ask you in the store saying, are you into wildlife or into fashion or into this or that? Anybody who wants to do photography, the cameras are the same. Lenses can differ depending on what kind of photographer you are. So theory of photography is the same for every genre. Now, this is a photograph I shot using creatively measuring light, which was falling on the tiger. The background was in shade, which is why I could control the exposure in such a way that I could get this black background here. Not getting into too much of depth of science for this level of knowledge discussion. I don't want us to get into scientific discussions here. We have a very little time. I need an hour to actually explain this concept called metering itself. But just to show you an example, I have worked in the Himalayas. Snow leopards are my current favorite cats. I've been in Spiti, in Ladakh, and quite a lot. Africa is my, let's call it native sometimes, because the amount of times I've been to Africa to do photography is absolutely unbelievable. 42 times to Kenya itself. Big cats are amazing there and stuff like that. So there are a lot of questions coming. I think I'll do a combination of answering questions while I'm talking. I'll be talking about question and answers later on as well. Shipra is asking, which brand is good? Well, this is a question, just for records, guys. I am the brand ambassador of Sony Alpha. I am somebody who has used a lot of Nikon gear in the past. I have used a lot of Canon gear in the past, but at the moment, I'm a brand ambassador of the Sony system. Having said that, while I love Sony, it's exceptional, I still think camera brands don't matter. You basically need to understand what you do with any brand. For example, I know exceptional photographers who are Nikon users, super exceptional photographers who are Canon users, and out of the world photographers who are using Sony or Panasonic or all kinds of things. To be honest, what gear you use doesn't matter too much to the results you produce. So do not get bogged down by these kind of decisions. Half of the time people are discussing, should I buy iPhone or Samsung or Nokia or that and this and everything. In the end, when you call, the other person's voice is going to be the same. When very small differences in the phones and the cameras and stuff like that. So don't worry about the gadget, worry about what you can do by picking up any one of them. There are questions also coming about career in photography. Honestly, you don't need to be an IIT alumni to be a photographer. Having said that, it's an interesting topic. I would recommend we'll take this in the end because it's a very passionate answer that I want to give. I don't want to break my momentum. So I'll answer this question later on. What kind of career options are there for photographers, especially for wildlife photography enthusiasts? I think for Abhishek kind of people, fashion photographers, there is much more scope than wildlife. We'll speak about that later. So I've traveled the world. This is Central America, Costa Rica, to be precise. There's a bird called the toucan. There's a macaw. I love to photograph portraits of birds, which, make people draw into it. So my goal is, as a photographer, using my beautiful photographs to make people fall in love with nature. Why do they need to fall in love with nature, and why do I care? Because if you don't fall in love with nature, you don't care about nature. If you don't care about nature, let's probably change that to we. If we don't care about nature, we won't think about what we should do to protect it. If we don't think about what we should do to protect it, they won't be protected. So it's a very direct correlation to wildlife conservation. I use beautiful images. In fact, the wildlife conservation community calls these pretty pictures. So I use pretty pictures to make people fall in love with these pretty animals most of the times who have ugly problems in this world. So I can't use ugly pictures to attract people. I use beautiful pictures, pretty pictures to attract people to this macaw, which is called the great green macaw. Or for that matter, this is a hummingbird called the rufous-tailed hummingbird. So if I don't show the beauty of this world, people will not be curious about it. That is why we love to see beautiful pictures first. Then when people get drawn into this world, then they start wondering about stuff, and they'll then realize some of the issues of conservation, which is the undercurrent agenda of every wildlife photographer today. While doing that, I also make sure I produce pictures which are not mere documents, pictures which are artistically, aesthetically attractive, because as an artist, I don't need a photocopy machine to take a picture, because there is no bird that has not been photographed, no animal that has not been photographed already. So why is it that I need to photograph? I can simply use somebody's photos and start talking about wildlife. I use my artistry to produce perspectives which come from my heart. Like, for example, this is an intentional slow shutter speed usage to show the wing blur of this hummingbird called I'm forgetting the name. This is a beautiful hummingbird in Costa Rica. It's called the violet saberwing. All right, great. So let me go ahead and show you some more pictures. Before that, we'll talk about the science of photography in less than 2 minutes. Great. So this is a white-tailed sea eagle in Japan. There's this beautiful island called Hokkaido. I have been there and done a lot of photography in Japan as well. I told you some of the places I traveled to. When I say I'm a wildlife photographer, people think I only photograph lions or tigers or snow leopards or pumas or jaguars or polar bears. It could also be a frog. It could be a snake. It could be an insect. It could be, for that matter, a flower. It could be Rafflesia in Southeast Asia, which is like the largest flower, or it could be the Nila Kurunji, which blooms once in 12 years, or it could be the Khas Plateau around Pune, which happens every time in a year. So when you say you're a natural history photographer, it need not be only tigers, leopards, lions, and stuff like that. The megafauna, as we call it, it could be any animal, subject, anything that lives in nature that is not domesticated is a subject for a natural history photographer. Sometimes even landscapes. I'll show you in the due course of this presentation how I use landscape photography to excite people about places in this world that they wouldn't have seen. Well, getting a lot of comments on the chat section. Somesh Singhal says, it looks like pasted photo on a background. Well, that's a good observation, Somesh. I would probably take that as a compliment, even though some photographers might get offended by that comment. You need to learn about something called depth of field. When you use a telephoto lens, the background gets completely out of focus and you separate the subject from the background. Depth of field is a word that you need to park aside in your notes. After this session, maybe you can go ahead and learn about it. And if you have seen pictures, well, let me go back to this picture. If you've seen pictures like these, where you almost have a studio kind of a background where everything is blurred and the subject is sharp, this is not photoshopped, cleaned the background, pasted a green screen on the background kind of a thing. This is the way it was shot in nature by using a telephoto lens, using a bigger aperture and stuff like that. So it's important to understand sometimes what seems like unbelievable because you've been using mobile phones and taking pictures. You'll never get a photo like this on a mobile phone unless you have the conditions which are very ideal. So this is a telephoto lens used to produce that kind of a background. All right, let's go ahead. The polar regions, one of my most important areas where I do work. Like this image, anybody who sees this will say, oh, drone footage. To be honest, this is not a drone shot. This is a wide angle lens. And this is a photograph which couldn't be any different if I used my iPhone or a smartphone and took a picture. I'm standing on the hull of my ship where Leonardo DiCaprio was standing. Of course, I was not with Kate Winslet, but I was with my camera. I was peeping down, the polar bear is peeping up, and I'm taking a picture of this animal which had come close to my ship. And my boat is actually very close to that iceberg, and I'm taking a top-down picture of this animal. So sometimes it's not about the camera, it's about the perspective. It's about the kind of, what can I say, the compositional abilities. It's about storytelling. What's beautiful about these images, there is an iceberg which is submerged underwater. In fact, you might have seen all these management gyans that people give saying above the water is only 10%, below the water is 90% kind of thing about the hard work a person does kind of a thing, right? Which is true in this image. There's a lot of iceberg below the surface of the ocean. There's a lot of ice above this polar bear, which is looking at us. This is an image which can be a mascot for climate change, for talking about the sea water, or let's say the sea level rise or glaciers melting and stuff like that. So using powerful images to communicate thoughts is important, not just making pretty pictures all the time. So this is Svalbard. I just wanted to show you where that photograph was taken. A lot of polar bears there. Polar bears live in the Arctic. Penguins live in the Antarctic. So that is why we go to the Arctic to photograph in this kind of a setup where we have a zodiac. We go around the zodiac finding polar bears on glaciers, on sea ice, and taking pictures of them like these sometimes, which are amazing. All right, so this is one of my award-winning photographs. Just for records, for people who are interested, some of you are photo enthusiasts there. This is a photograph shot with a lens called a fisheye lens, a fisheye lens. So the perspective it is producing looks like it's a fisheye perspective, which is what makes this look different from what you've seen in most cameras. So the horizon becoming a curve there is because of the lens that has been used. So sometimes it's the equipment, but the idea is more important. The equipment will produce what you want. Somebody called Prince Pandey is asking, how can I click picture with a 48 megapixel camera? To be honest, let's quickly push this megapixel aside. To be honest, megapixels won't make any difference to the way you click an image. More the megapixels, bigger the image. Apart from that, there's nothing else which can change. One of the biggest myths about camera buyers is more megapixels is better camera, more megapixels is better clarity, contrast, blah, blah, blah. Nothing is right except more megapixel is equal to bigger the image. So don't run after megapixels. Every year, they have to come up with something for you to change your phone. So they would keep on adding cameras with higher megapixels. It only gives you bigger resolution. Don't chase megapixels. What you can do with 20, 30, 40 megapixels is good enough today to make a huge print as well. This photograph was shot with a Canon 5D Mark III about 6-7 years ago, which is a 21 megapixel camera. I don't need 40, 50 megapixels. And I have printed this image 44 inches wide because that's the maximum I can print on a printer. And this was an award-winning picture. It won me a prize. I mean, I also think this is a powerful image, which tells you a lot of stories about the polar regions, the sea, ice, and the climate change and stuff like that. Anyway, so these are some pictures of Arctic. So one of the core concepts of today's discussion is moving away from the auto mode, all right? So let's first understand, is it our egoistic reasons that we want to move away from the auto mode? Why should we move away from the auto mode? What is the real purpose of auto mode? Coming back to my point of the two perspectives of why you become a photographer. If you are a documentary photographer, what you see is what you get. Auto mode can very well satisfy that need, because you're not producing anything from your thought process or creativity. You're using a camera, you're clicking a picture, and what is there is getting recorded in the camera. Sometimes that also doesn't happen properly, for which we'll learn some techniques of how you should place your subject, not against the light, but in the light and stuff like that. But if you take some normal precautionary measures while taking pictures, it's very easy to get real pictures which are correctly exposed. But correctly exposed doesn't mean creative pictures. They are properly taken documents of your scene. That's what I mean, documentary photographs. All right, so the reason why we get away from auto mode is because we want to produce something that is not actually seen through the naked eye. I'll tell you something. If there are 10 people standing next to me, all of them have the same camera and the same lens, and we're all seeing the same subject, there is the capability for every person in this group of 10 to produce a picture which is different from the other guy. Now that is when it is creative, where you use equipment to produce that fishiness, or you use equipment to produce that out of focus background, or you focus something and out of focus something, or you compose it in a different way. Everybody in that group of 10 can make a photo which is their own communication, or let's say storytelling abilities. And that is why we don't use auto mode, because what does auto mode do? Let's talk about something which is called the exposure triangle. So before we talk about becoming good photographers, there are 3 aspects to photography, guys. One is you expose correctly. What does expose mean? When you take a picture, layman's terminology, when you take a picture, if the photograph is not too bright nor too dark, the photograph is correctly taken with respect to the light, brightness and shadows and darkness, then it is called correctly exposed. What is focusing? So let's say, have you been to a zoo where you're stood in front of the cage of the zoo and there's a tiger inside, and you're trying to take a picture of the tiger, and the camera focuses the grills or the cage while the tiger inside is getting out of focus. Now that is what is called focusing, not the philosophical focusing. You're philosophically focusing on the tiger, but photographically focusing on the cage. So we learn to measure light. When we say expose, we measure light correctly so that we set the right aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and we focus correctly, which means we'll tell the camera's optics to adjust in such a way that it will focus the tiger inside, not the grills in front of it or the cage in front of it. That is what is focusing. Exposing, focusing. The last is composing. Exposing and focusing, we can call that as the science of photography. Composition, or let's say composing, is what we can call as the art of photography. So you can take a picture which is perfectly exposed but badly focused. You can take a picture which is badly exposed and perfectly focused. You can take a picture with correct exposure, correct focusing, but badly composed. So it's important to look at the science of photography and art of photography as well. So quickly, let's understand what the exposure triangle is. Not taking a detailed class here, because I'm sure there are people of different levels of knowledge here as well. Talking about exposure triangle. Why do we call that exposure triangle? Is because it has 3 sides to the exposure. There's an aperture, shutter, and ISO. So what is aperture? I'm sure if there's anybody who don't know what is aperture, please raise your hands. Aperture is nothing but the opening of the lens or the size of the hole in the, if you open a dictionary, Siva, if you open the dictionary and go and see the word aperture, it means a hole. So it's simply the hole in your lens through which light passes. If you take a camera and point it to a subject, light passes through this hole in the lens to your camera. That hole is called the aperture. We can increase the aperture, we can decrease the aperture. So let me take a very, first standard child can understand this analogy. So I'm sure IIT guys can understand it very well. So let's take a bucket. Let's take a tap with a pipe. Now, if I open the tap, water flows in from the pipe. Let's say the diameter of this pipe is 1 inch dia. Now, when I open the tap, water flows in and it fills the bucket. Now, let's see how this analogy fits into the world of photography. Now, if I open the tap and let's say it takes 1 minute for this bucket to fill. So in photography, we can call this 1 minute as 1 minute exposure. In other words, let's replace each parts of this example with photography. The diameter of the pipe is what we can call as the aperture. 1 inch dia pipe is the aperture. 1 minute to take the bucket is what called as shutter speed. I've just mentioned shutter here. It is shutter speed. That's my bad. It's shutter speed. So the diameter of the aperture and the time taken for light to fall on your camera sensor is what is called as a exposure or exposure. What is ISO? ISO is basically the sensitivity of your camera sensor. Don't want to get into depths and do a science class here, but just to tell you, you need to enlarge or decrease the size of your opening so that you can increase the light or decrease the light of your camera's aperture, which gets more light into the camera. Now, let's say if you opened your tap, you're filling this bucket in 1 minute. Now, if you want 1 inch pipe, filling the bucket in 1 minute. Now, if you want to fill the bucket at a faster pace, if you want to fill the bucket in half a minute, what should you do, guys? What should you do? I'm asking you guys a question. If you want to fill the bucket in lesser time, what should you do? Let's see if somebody answers while I'm talking about. So you need to increase the diameter of this particular pipe. Instead of 1 inch, if you increase the diameter of the pipe to 2 inches, you get twice the amount of water, which half the amount of time required. So 2 inch pipe will get more water to the bucket, because of which the bucket now only needs half a minute to fill. You understand, guys? This is the most simplest way of explaining exposure. You will increase the aperture to increase the time required, or rather decrease the time required. That is what is called as an exposure. Bigger the aperture, faster the bucket fills. Bigger the aperture, faster the shutter speed. So that is what is called exposure triangle. If you take a half an inch pipe, it will take 2 minutes for the bucket to fill. If you take a 1/4 inch pipe, it will take much more time for the bucket to fill. If you take a 4 inch pipe, it will fill the bucket even faster. So both the size of the aperture will matter to the time required for the bucket to fill. So there's a question by Mohit Chaturvedi, how to balance aperture on ISO? Both seems to be balancing light. Good question. So that brings us to the next topic of discussion, guys. So the next topic is exposure program modes. So you might have known of, all of you know in your camera, there's a mode called the auto mode. Mobile phone users, bear with us for a few minutes. We'll come to topics which are useful for mobile phone users as well in less than 5 minutes. But let's say you have a DSLR. I think 90% of the people today will have some kind of a DSLR. So let's give them some knowledge also. So what were we talking about? We were talking about aperture, ISO and stuff like that. So in the camera, there are exposure program modes. For instance, we all know of the auto mode. What does the auto mode do? The auto mode decides how much the aperture should be, how much time should it take to fill the bucket, what should be the ISO. So ISO is something like increasing the sensitivity of your sensor or decreasing the sensitivity of your sensor. Now, for a given Mohit, for a given aperture, if somebody has higher ISO, their bucket will fill faster. For a given aperture, if somebody has lesser ISO, their bucket will fill longer or take more time to fill. So increasing the ISO makes the bucket fill faster. I hope you guys understand when I say bucket, I'm talking about an exposure. It's just an analogy. All right, so aperture, shutter speed, ISO. In the camera, we have modes like aperture priority, where you decide, Mohit, what's the size of the pipe. You will tell the camera, I want the pipe to be 1 inch dia. And then the camera will say, in that case, I will fill the bucket in 1 minute. Now you will say, I want to fill the bucket in half a minute, but I cannot increase my pipe. That's the biggest pipe I have. So you increase the ISO. When you increase the ISO with the given pipe, your camera will become more sensitive and it'll actually get more light in the set time and probably expose that in more faster time than it was with a lower ISO. So aperture priority is your answer, Mohit. Use aperture priority, fix an aperture, increase the ISO to increase your shutter speeds. Don't want to do too much of science there. It's important to know exposure triangle for photography to become useful. So look at this photograph. Let me go back to the previous one. This is a photograph which was shot using a faster shutter speed. Or in other words, I should say it was not shot using a slower shutter speed. It's normal shutter speed. Now, the next photograph was shot using a slower shutter speed. This is because I wanted this waterfall to get blurred, this stream of water to get blurred. I've kept the camera on a tripod. It's very close to sunset. And I've used a shutter priority mode here so that the water gets blurred because I've opened the tap for a long time and the bucket is filled for a longer time. Let's say 1 second. During this 1 second, the camera opened. During this 1 second, whatever was moving became blurred. Whatever was static became sharp. So that is the shutter priority example. So this is an example, very cliche waterfall example of shooting pictures with waterfall blurred in your pictures. These are some landscape pictures just for you to see how it's important to compose images. Very limited amount of time in this 1 hour. I cannot do too many things. I would love for the people who have organized this to share details. If people want to ask me questions after this also, I'm very active on social media to answer questions of whatever people want to know because we hardly have 15 more minutes to my session. All right, so some questions coming up. What do you use for photo editing? Anonymous attendee. I am actually an evangelist with Adobe for Adobe's Lightroom. So I use a software called Adobe Lightroom. In fact, this is one of the most common questions of people who keep asking, do you edit your images? In other words, they feel editing is wrong and people who are good photographers should not edit. The fact is, even if you're the best photographer in the world, editing is mandatory because the camera cannot see nature like the way your eyes can see. Mandatory process of editing. I use Lightroom. Having said that, editing doesn't mean manipulating. So what is manipulating? You're taking a picture, plucking out something from that picture, pasting it on this picture. That is what is called manipulation. That is not necessary for everybody to do. In fact, I never do that. Some genres of photography, they do that, like product photography. Like if you have a model who has come for a shoot, the model has a pimple and you want to do the shoot, you paid lakhs of rupees to the model. You take a picture, use Photoshop, remove the pimple and say, buy this cream, because of this cream, the pimple will go. That is what is product photography. The model doesn't mind, the product doesn't mind, the consumers think because of the product, the face is becoming so beautiful and stuff like that. So product photography doesn't mind manipulation. Journalism photography, no manipulation, please, because the very aspect that you say nature photography, journalism photography will be lost. Rahul Tiwari, the software is called Adobe Lightroom, Lightroom, Adobe Lightroom. All right. Asha is asking a question. Does increasing ISO increase grains in the pictures as it did in the film days? A very good question, Asha. That's absolutely correct. Increasing ISO comes at the cost of increasing noise. Increasing grains, the right word we use today is called increasing noise. That happens even today. Higher ISOs equal more grains. Having said that, more professional cameras are able to battle this and produce pictures without too much of noise. So this answer will keep on getting revised over time. 5 years from now, I would not be worried about using higher ISOs. In fact, even now, when I use cameras like the Sony A9 II, or let's say the Nikon D5 or the Canon 1DX Mark II and professional cameras, which can work in very high ISOs without actually producing noise. All right, so I think I'll take you further. So this is a very nice example of a slow shutter speed picture. I'm sure with the amount of time that we have today, I'll not be able to answer every question. We have at least 37 open ones right now. I'll see if I've not answered them. I'll propose to answer them offline and send an email. Maybe the organizers can send an email to all the attendees so that they benefit from post this session as well. This is a picture in Iceland. I shot this picture using a slow shutter speed, but not too slow, but not too fast, so that the water appears to be frozen in a section like this. To do this, we use something called as filters. Excuse me. To do this, we use something called as filters. When I say filters, the other day on Instagram, I was explaining and people were thinking I'm using Instagram filters or some software like Snapspeed and stuff like that. I'm actually talking about real filters in front of the glass. So this filter is like your sunglasses. You put that in front of the glass, cut down the light so that you make the 4 o'clock in the evening look like 6 o'clock in the evening. And you can use a slower shutter speed to get this motion blur of a picture. Second idea about taking good pictures is focusing. So we spoke about exposure, where you do the math and the science of it, measure the light, keep the right aperture, shutter speed, ISO, use aperture priority or shutter priority, and the manual mode. I don't think using manual mode is equal to knowing photography. Manual mode is just like one of the different modes. We use aperture priority as much as shutter priority, as much as manual mode. I mean, if you have heard somebody saying, if you don't know how to use manual mode, you're not a good photographer, that is wrong. Manual mode is just one of the modes. I would relate to an analogy like in your car, you have the first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, aperture priority, shutter priority, manual mode and stuff like that. So you need each of these gears for different purposes. Likewise, in the camera, each mode has a different purpose. Let me take a couple of questions. All right, Prasun, the easiest way to decide the value between aperture and ISO is stick to aperture priority mode, stick to any aperture, camera will calculate the shutter speed depending on its light meter. I think good photographers don't challenge themselves unnecessarily. They challenge themselves for creativity, not for the science, because the camera is the best machine to calculate light, not us. We can use a lot of external lenses with mobile phones as well, but trust me, it's not a comparison to using telephoto lenses on DSLRs. All right, so I think let's talk about focusing. So this is an example to tell you what focusing means and what's the importance of focusing. Now, this is a cheetah image I shot in Africa. This is the end output of that shot, about 27 pictures I shot in a sequence. Now, what happens is, if you see in the distance there's the cub of this cheetah, which is completely out of focus. Now, how does the camera know I need to focus the impala and the mother who is hunting and not the cub at a distance? That is what is called focusing. You need to use your camera's autofocus points and tell the camera to focus this place or that place or that place. That is what is called autofocusing. Look at this, guys. I have actually taken so many pictures of this sequence. The cheetah was chasing. My autofocus points was on the cheetah and she's chasing. I'm just showing you how this action was happening. Now they've come to the center of my frame. Now they come to slightly to the right of my frame. I'm actually moving my autofocus point now. And then suddenly they turn. And that's when I get the penultimate photo or this photograph, which I've used actually to print. So if you don't talk to the camera, this autofocus point is the interface between you and the camera. You need to tell the camera where to focus. If you use auto mode, the camera doesn't know whether it should focus the cheetah and the impala in the front or the cheetah in the background or the grass in the background. The camera doesn't understand as much. It's not an intelligent device. It's just a mechanical device. You need to tell it where to focus. That is what we call as focusing. In the earlier days, focusing was happening in the lens, which is what we call as manual focusing. In today's day, we use autofocusing to achieve that. By pointing the autofocus point on the subject and pressing the camera, it focuses the subject and we track and take pictures. It's easier said than done, but it's much better than it used to be in the 80s. All right. So Natasha, can you tell me how much more time I have so that I'll fine tune the last few minutes, maybe take more questions and show a couple of ideas?
Yeah, we have 5-7 more minutes.
Okay, great. All right. So talking about mobile phone users and cameras which are not sophisticated, you still can do a lot of amazing work. One of them, I think one of the most common problems which people do with mobile phones is they don't compose images better. Like, though this is a picture shot using a DSLR, it's very easy to shoot a picture like this using a mobile phone. Of course, you won't get those rays of light like in a DSLR, but the point is, what you need to learn about if you have humble equipment is you need to get more creative. That's when you can bypass the gadgetry limitations by having more creative thought processes. So composition is a very important thing. Let's look at this photo and understand a quick simple rule of something we call the rule of thirds. Now, if you divide a canvas into 9 parts, there are these lines which are intersecting, and these points where they're intersecting are where, if you place your subject, you can probably make a much more aesthetically pleasing image. Like, for example, the sun is in this point here, and that's why it's a more beautiful composition. Let's see some more examples of the rule of thirds. Why is it called a rule of thirds? If you look at the sun, on the right side of the sun, it's 1/3 the frame. On the left side of the sun, it is 2/3 the frame. That is why it's called a rule of thirds. You divide it in 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and it's not just on the x-axis, even on the y-axis. The sun is in the top 1/3, the water and the lagoon is in the bottom 1/3. So that is the rule of thirds. It's a very common knowledge in photography world. If you just spend some few weeks with photographers, you'll learn that. Photographer here standing in the bottom left, which is why the right side is the 2/3, the left side is the 1/3. So compositionally, place your subjects close to any one of these intersection points to make much more aesthetically pleasing images. This is the Monument Valley in US. Now, sometimes it's important to have compositional abilities in places like these where you not just look at the subject, but also the landscape sometimes. So in this case, I waited for a car to come to place that in one of these intersections so that I get a foreground interest and a background interest as well. This can be done in a mobile phone. This doesn't require a telephoto lens or a high-end DSLR and stuff like that. Composition is the biggest skill for a mobile phone photographer. So you need to compose your images much better. That's the most important things. Some ideas like see a subject or a scene, and you have to imagine some leading lines in a scene like this. For example, this has nothing to do with DSLRs, mirrorless, high-end, any camera, including a mirrorless camera, mobile phone camera, you can start doing this. So if you look at this scene here, now there are so many lines that are joining in this intersection point. Let me go back to that scene. Now these are called leading lines. If you draw these imaginary lines, all of them are leading us to that point, which is the intersection of the rule of thirds. So that is what is making more aesthetically stronger composition. So it's important to imagine these and produce pictures which are stronger in compositions as well. One of the important things is to have a foreground interest. Like I was shooting this subject in Iceland, and I realized I want a foreground which can show the same subject, but the interesting foreground made this photo a little more interesting. Like this one. Piece of chunk of ice there with this landscape, that became the subject, and there was a beautiful background. A lot of people take pictures of lovely sunsets, but they are just good ingredients for a good photograph. They are not good photographs. You need an interesting foreground subject to make a beautiful background have a meaning. If there's no foreground, your picture is only a background. It's good for a background desktop wallpaper where your icons are your foreground. So these are some examples of the Monument Valley. Look at this, the same place, I have used an interesting sand dune in the foreground, and at a distance, you see the same mesa in Monument Valley in US. So use compositional abilities to have interesting foregrounds, use rule of thirds, and you're already making pictures. Because for a mobile phone guy, there's not much of aperture, shutter speed, ISO discussion there. Camera can produce it. You can click on some areas which are very bright and draw down, or pull your screen down and it'll start underexposing, and you can get pleasant looking images there. So composition is your strength. Look at this photograph, the same mesa, but I've moved 5 kilometers to another place to keep this foreground subject to make this photograph. So look at these two photographs. This one, it's a picture of this arch, which was eroded by wind, but I wanted to have a foreground interest. So I went 20 feet behind, used this tree as a foreground to the same scene. It adds a lot of depth to this image. So it's important to think about compositional abilities. Standing on top of the ridge, shooting this waterfall, climbing 20 feet down, shooting it from the water level. Have a foreground subject. So small things like these, which can make interesting changes to your photograph. Foreground is the king of a photograph. You need to have an interesting foreground, which draws the viewers to a farther background. All right, so I think without too much time, I have 2-3 minutes. Let me see if I can answer some quick rapid fire questions. Okay, what are the important features to consider in order to have creative photograph? Das Sudhir Kumar. I think you need to think about it from a perspective of a viewer or the audience. Many times photographers are in exciting situations. They take a picture and they show the picture. And if you've realized, if they are explaining the photograph to the audience should see it and say, wow, that's when it's a good photograph. So, I mean, being a user experience designer, I can think from the user's perspective very easily. So Sudhir, start thinking like an audience and judge your photographs, not like it's your creation, but like somebody else is seeing, and you'll realize what can be better in it. Career in photography, especially wildlife photography, Praveen Kumar. Very tough to make a career in wildlife photography because there's hardly any job. There's nobody, your subjects don't pay for you. So it's usually an NGO which takes images. They don't buy image, they take images. You donate images to an NGO for conservation purposes. A wildlife photographer like me earns a living by teaching wildlife photography. You really don't get too many assignments by going and taking pictures because there's no buyer. Nat Geo is there, Discovery is there, but there are 2, 3, 4 companies in this whole wide world. 99% of the wildlife photographers don't make a living selling photographs. There are some of us who do by selling fine art prints, but it's not justified for the amount of investment we do in this field. What kind of lenses to use for bird photography? Somebody called India. It's very easy. You need to use telephoto lenses because birds are always at a distance. You can't get them very close. So it's important to have telephoto lenses. Asha disagrees with me about definition of creative versus documentary. Documentary photos can be creative. Well, Asha, I never said documentary photos are not creative. I said the purpose of a creative photograph is to make something which is creative as well, whereas a documentary photo's purpose is not to make it creative. Having said that, I specialize in making creative documentaries. So there's nothing to disagree there. You're agreeing to me in one way. It is just that you produce artistic pictures by thinking about it. What I meant is you don't stand in front of a scene and click a picture because you're like a newspaper photographer. He's not thinking about aesthetics. He's not thinking about light. He's not thinking about, I also don't mean to say it's a disrespectful thing to do documentary photography. I'm trying to define it. When you start thinking about creative, like you're talking about Raghu Rai, Dayanita Singh, whoever that person is, if they've thought about a photograph by adding creative thinking, it's a creative photograph, even if it means documenting some aspect of, let's say, the Bhopal gas tragedy or something like that. So I don't mean to say creative photographs or let's say documentary photographers don't need to be creative. So please don't misunderstand me on that. What are some good editing apps? Lightroom, as I said, Photoshop, there are a few more. How did you click photo of the tiger with spotlight without editing the photo? Well, Somesh, that's what is called light metering. There's a concept called using spot metering, and the light has to be conducive to do that. It's a long lesson. I have a podcast episode on that. If you're interested, you can look at that. So Natasha, you can stop me whenever you want. I'll keep going till you stop me. I think we're already at 12 o'clock. As I said, I don't mind answering questions if people, are okay to get an Excel sheet of answers. You can download this from Zoom and send it to me. I'll try to answer them because it's a limited amount of time and we haven't been able to answer all the questions in this session here. But I think I'll stop. Natasha, is it okay if we stop here? Because, this is a topic which can go on for 5 days. So in the interest of time, I think, I hope I was able to share some insights.
Yes, thank you so much, Jan. The topic was really very enlightening. I think I have not learned so much about photography in such a short span of time till now. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Sanjeev Gambhir is asking, how can you follow my work? Well, I am all over social media. My name is Jayant Sharma, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you want, you can find me.
Okay. Now I would like to welcome Ravinder sir for the thank you note.
Yeah. Thank you, Natasha. We had a very wonderful session through Mr. Jain Sharma. It was very mesmerizing, and we are almost thinking like as if we are watching like something like either in among the wildlife or watching the National Geography or other channels. So it was very immersing and very educative. So I see this today as I discussed. As I told during my welcome address that why we have taken this webinar and this week. So it gives me immense pleasure that this event we are celebrating the Gandhi Jayanti, our national father, and then Lal Bahadur Shastri Jayanti is also today, who has given the iconic Jai Jawan Jai Kisan. And we are IIT Delhi, that's my alma mater, is having Diamond Jubilee celebration also are there. So there, and then apart from National Wildlife Week is there. So these are 4 events have, converse today. So that's a very important day and event, and that Mr. Jan Sharma has shared his thoughts, and I mean how he has done. I would like to share one of my colleague, my fellow alumni, Mr. Vinu Pasriza, who is very well known among the IITians. He's 82, 86 batch, and he has made one a video by name Avalokan, and it is, I mean, it is on our website also, and in many events he has captured IIT Delhi live through camera, those still photographs. I'm not very technical expert, so but what I heard I'm just sharing. But but one comment he has given for today's chat, which I would like to read to the August audience, that what he has wrote. I'm just reading it. What he says, that what will be also great to see if you were to create an archives of pictures of IIT Delhi. While a couple of books have been made on IIT, these are mostly architecture. These are many pictures in personal collection, which also capture history and life at IIT. This could all be collected and cataloged, and perhaps the larger purpose could be to create an exhibition or perhaps even a museum on IIT Delhi. So I am taking his suggestion forward, and I'm already, we are contemplating an alumni museum. We have told the university, the alma mater also, the director also, that we need a very big place as an office where we want to create an alumni museum. So I think the Jayant Sharma will also play a key role. I mean, this we come out some key idea discussion, how to create a visual history of IIT Delhi. So because as an alumni president, my basic responsibility to create engagement among the alumni. That is my basic responsibility. So I look forward that we should have some synergy with Jayant Sharma, with Vinu Pasriza, and other alums who are equally talented about the photography, which I am not aware. Many of them are there still, but I'm not aware. So I would request them also through this address. And as I say that we all lives in hostel, our memories are of the hostel. So I would like to have something from the hostel point of view, because whenever in IIT when we meet, first we say what is so I'm so and so, and I'm so and so batch, and the third is hostel. So once the hostel connection is there, the bonding happens instant. Even though at this age, I mean, once you spend more years away from your campus life, I mean, this thing doesn't make big role, but still it has a very binding force. You got instant connection. So I would like to have that something called like a hostel documentary or hostel life documentary, apart from one alumni museum. Thank you very much, Jain. Thank you very much, Praveen, and all my fellow office bearer, Gitanjali, Josna, Asif, and fellow EC members. Thank you very much. And it's a great session. And we look forward to have many more such in the future also. And thank you, Walmog, also keeping this show very active and promoting this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Contest
Ravinder.
information,
Yeah.
Natasha, some contest information.
Exactly. So I would like to inform everybody that from just after this session, the competition will start. The window is open from 2nd October till 9th of October. And the registration can be done on our website, and only the registered alumni will be allowed to participate. And we have very exciting prizes up to 50K. So I just say that use your skills that you have gained in the session to enhance your photography and submit great photographs for the competition. You can find more details about the competition on our website. Thank you. I think we can close the event. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Mr. Ravinder.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.